What's up everyone, it's ENDYMION, and recently games like Tekken 8 and Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth have both been released internationally, and I'm sure many of you are enjoying these games yourselves right now. I'm currently enjoying my time with Tekken 8, and it's a big week for Japanese releases, and I'm happy to see that. Unfortunately, my copy of Like a Dragon got delayed, but it's okay, I'll have it soon enough. However, though, the battle of localizers versus the audiences at large has continued to rage on, and there's some weird things to talk about. From Tekken 8 making fun of woke weirdos and how Japan has started to slowly but surely bend the knee to Western sensibilities and more, and how these changes are potentially going to infect even the most sacrosanct of havens of digital entertainment like From Software themselves. To begin, let's look at this article from the Japan Times, which inspired me to make this in the first place. It's titled, "From Japan to the World, How to Translate a Game." This article paints a very worrying picture when it comes to the current and future of Japanese-made media in today's modern gaming landscape. The writer of this article, whose name is Matthias Sina, says that there's a growing concern from Japanese companies when it comes to developing their games for international audiences. As he puts it, appealing to overseas players whose expectations on issues such as sexism are increasingly influencing the content of major titles. This opening to this article already concerned me greatly, as it shows how Japanese companies are very much aware of the nonsense permeating throughout Western media. And in my opinion anyway, based on what this article is saying, it seems like the higher-ups in these Japanese companies are taking the wrong lessons from this and are instead forcing themselves to bend to the whims of what they perceive international audiences want instead of respecting and adhering to their own culture instead. According to this article, and just stats in general, around 70% of revenue from the majority of Japanese-made media comes outside of Japan itself, which is staggering. But of course, it's not very surprising either, seeing as how there is an insane demand out there for anything hailing from that side of the world. And I think the reason for that is because customers are eager for content that doesn't resemble anything that surrounds their everyday lives. The typical Western consumer can't walk a few minutes without seeing a pride flag, gender or pronoun nonsense, or something in between that, and when it comes to commercials, entertainment and more, these messaging tactics are overflowing from all angles. So naturally, once something becomes too much, a person's instinct is to seek out whatever is opposite of what's around them. So, it's no surprise that Japanese, or really Eastern media in general, has become nothing short of a godsend for the average Western consumer, myself included. But as this article states, these companies are taking the wrong lessons from these experiences. Part of this article interviews the SEGA localization team, who are in charge of the localizations for games such as Yakuza, or Like a Dragon games as they're known now. I love those games. I've beaten a ton of Yakuza titles myself, and I've loved them all. But the SEGA team did say some stuff about how they tackle the translation side of their games. They say that originally it was difficult to convey to audiences outside of Japan as to how certain jokes or terms would be perceived considering the barrier of cultures. But SEGA's team says due to the ongoing relations between audiences worldwide, it's become much easier to implement things into their games that normally people outside of Japan's core culture wouldn't understand as well. Stuff like, for example, no longer needing to change things like ramen to words like noodles. Since years ago, many Westerners didn't know what ramen even was, but of course now everybody does. It's little things like this that have slowly but surely become welcome changes as different cultures interact. SEGA's localization team finished their part of the interview by saying, "Thankfully the industry, and perhaps more importantly consumers, have changed a lot since those days. And we are now able to be more faithful to the cultural and emotional content of Japanese games than ever." This is of course a good thing, because the last thing we need is for Eastern media to resemble anything close to Western style content. None of us want more Western schlock. It's why Eastern stuff is exploding in popularity these past few years to begin with. So while SEGA's localization may seem somewhat okay, this then turns sour once the article switches over to interviewing Bandai Namco's localization team. In case you don't know who they are, Bandai Namco is the company behind stuff like Tekken, and they've also been partnered for years with developers like From Software. For example, games like Dark Souls 1 through 3 and stuff like Elden Ring, yeah, that's all published and partnered with Bandai Namco. So chances are you love their games, and rightfully so, because stuff like Elden Ring or Dark Souls is the cream of the crop. But even then they said some very weird stuff, and Bandai's localization team says international audiences are absolutely integral to the process of how their games are depicted and translated from the point of inception. One of these people is Frank Genti, who's the senior localization manager at Bandai Namco, who said their staff and the games they make have become hyper aware of Western sensibilities. And this has affected their outlook when it comes to making things such as how Japanese game developers dress their heroines as the Me Too movement changes mindsets. That line is very worrying for me to read for many reasons. Frank further states that we tell them that the cleavage is a bit too exposed or the skirt is a bit too short, he adds. Before they weren't very flexible, but they've become more proactive on such subjects. The Me Too movement line being unironically spoken about when it comes to games such as Tekken is nothing short of concerning to me. And this echoes what was said earlier as well, since Japanese companies like SEGA or Bandai Namco are taking some of the wrong lessons from this. They believe, due to the feedback they get from their Western counterparts at the localization side, which are no doubt to some degree likely harboring some form of woke ideology, are being told to not exemplify fully the cultural strength of Japan, but to instead make and shift things to fit the agenda or mindset of what they perceive is the average Western customer. But the problem here is that Bandai, Sega, and even places like Square Enix who do Final Fantasy are essentially being told what Western audiences want from the perspective of a very loud and very biased minority. That small group, of course, are the identity politically driven activists that have long been attempting to weasel their way into the hallowed halls of Japan's greatest legacy titles. It's akin to having a snake whispering in Eve's ear, if you will. This does nothing but make these Western companies believe everyone must think and believe like how these activists do, but it's just not true. In reality, the massive majority of customers and players of Japanese content in fact want nothing but the uncensored, unfiltered, and untouched versions of these products to reach them. And the less influence and tampering done by activists, in many people's eyes, myself included, the better it is. This, unfortunately, should be the way these companies conduct their business practices, but it doesn't seem to be the case always. Sega's Like a Dragon producer and executive officer Masayoshi Yokohama shared his thoughts into how Sega conducts their research into ensuring their games make sense in English and other languages. But it's worrying nonetheless where he said this: many representations which were normal in Japan in the first Like a Dragon games are no longer acceptable today. We ask our teams in the United States and Europe to read the game's script, and they tell us if they see things that wouldn't be acceptable in their country. This may seem standard and okay to some who read that, but to me, that very noble and honest way of approaching things can unfortunately be contorted to become easy prey for weirdos who have infiltrated these companies. Because of this approach by Japanese developers, it seems normal and straightforward on their end. They, after all, don't speak English, and of course they just present what they made and then hope their teams who do speak those languages can help them. But as there's many times in the past where this trust has been taken advantage of, for example Jamie Marchi, who's the director of dubs at Crunchyroll, these sorts of people use their positions and influence to not just translate what's on the paper one-to-one, but instead many of these localizers, or vocalizers as I like to call them, instead see themselves not as their job descriptions, but they actually believe that they are just as much the creators of the original content that they're translating themselves. And this then leads to these vocalizers feeling as if they have as much say as to what a story or character says on an equal level as the actual author who wrote and made the story or manga or video game in the first place. And it's because of this twisted sense of power that we're in this conundrum to begin with. And unfortunately, when it comes to Sega or Bandai to varying degrees, their goodwill is being appropriated and taken advantage of by miserable activists who want to change the culture to fit their own agenda. It doesn't help when it's confirmed in the article that certain cultural jokes or references within Like a Dragon at least, such as LGBT caricatures and sexist cliches, have also been axed. This obviously was decided upon and suggested not by the actual creators of the game, since they have made jokes on behalf of these groups before because within their culture, that's fine to do. And no doubt these changes to current or future releases are instead being done and deliberately implemented by those same localizers who, like I said, are attempting to change the culture. And I don't know about you, but having the Yakuza or Like a Dragon games become more tolerant to other groups, it sounds more like some Western weirdo employee getting their way than anything else. And again, what fans outside of Japan want is the uncensored and unfiltered versions of these games or mangas. We don't need some colored-haired, mentally ill activist telling us what we can or can't stomach based on their beliefs. But like always, the vocal minority always have sway over the changes that end up influencing the quiet masses. And this article, more than anything, proves that the battle against the vocalizers is nowhere near over. But thankfully, at least they are telling on themselves openly now, which gives way to people like myself and others to call them out and keep them accountable. I don't want what I've said in this video to dissuade you into believing that games like Tekken 8 or Infinite Wealth are not worth supporting when they absolutely are. But while these practices are happening, we can still make a change by telling these companies that we don't want this in the future. Thankfully, at least some people still have some balls at these companies. For example, over at Bandai, you have Tekken 8, which got into some hot water when early review copies of the game started posting screenshots of a character talking about cultural appropriation. This made some fans stop in their tracks wondering if Tekken had been destroyed by this infiltration of activists. But thankfully, now that the game is officially out, it's been proven that instead Tekken 8 actually makes fun of these people instead. To give you some context, the scene in question is from one of the character endings you get from playing the game's modes. And this particular ending has Lily and Azucena talking to each other. Azucena decides to combine tea and coffee into a single drink, to which Lily responds wondering if what she's doing is cultural appropriation. Anyway, here's the full clip so you can see it for yourself.
During the tournament, Azucena met the tea-loving socialite Lily. Even after the tournament concluded, the pair would continue to clash in heated debate, a feud between coffee and tea.
Il faut du thé pour clore un repas. Ce thé Rochefort rose cultivé sur nos terres est absolument divin.
¿De qué hablas? Es obvio que es café. Nuestra mezcla de azucena es la mejor. Oye, ¿cuál crees que es el mejor? No parece interesarle ninguno de los dos. ¡Ah! ¡Ya sé! ¿Qué tal si los mezclamos juntos?
J'ai entendu parler d'une boisson de ce genre en Asie. Alors c'est de l'appropriation culturelle.
¡Ay, no seas anticuada! Aquí hay un pequeño extra. ¡Tarán! ¿Qué tal esto? Te apuesto que funcionará. Mi inspiración nunca me falla.
¿Eh?
¿Ah? Sabía que sería bueno.
As you can see, there's no wokeness, if you will, within the clip once the full context is given. And instead, it's actually Tekken 8's writers and developers giving a massive middle finger to woke weirdos instead. Thankfully, this could have been a big, disastrous stink on Tekken 8. But no doubt, thanks to Katsuhiro Harada, who is the chief director of the entire Tekken series, he likely wanted to make fun of these people, and all I can say is kudos to him and his team for shitting on these localizers with this ending. But it's clear that currently, when it comes to the absolute state of modern video games right now, that the biggest players in the space are quickly becoming increasingly based and Eastern made. From games like Sekiro or Elden Ring winning Game of the Year at the biggest award shows in the world for gaming, or Baldur's Gate 3 shitting all over other Western games. And the current massive explosive rise of hits like Pal World, or things like Tekken and Infinite Wealth, which both scored 90 on Metacritic. And by the way, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, and Tekken have already blew right past their Steam all-time numbers within a single day of release, showing that this monumental sweep by Eastern media is not some random one-off occurrence. It actually keeps happening, and since stuff like Pal World is imploding Steam servers, selling over 8 million copies in less than a week, And now you have these two games killing it and stuff like Grand Blue and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on their way too. I think it's safe to say that 2024, for the foreseeable future, is an insane Japanese-led sweep across the board. And this no doubt will anger Western journalists, localizers, and developers as well. Because audiences are not only tired of their nonsense, but they are putting their money where their mouths are and actually supporting these things too. This is the inevitable result of an industry that has long rejected its player base with nonsensical writing and pandering at every turn. And it's high time the modern gaming industry returns to some semblance of normalcy going forward. And even though places like Bandai Namco can at times strike back against these weirdos, this nonetheless makes me worried about the future of certain titles. And companies like From Software, for example, are easily my favorite gaming developer of the past 15 years and then some. They have delivered so many great classics, it's incredible. And they've shaped the industry and given birth to subgenres like Souls-likes, which I'm sure you've played a few yourselves. This rot, if you will, cannot be left to fester if we want to keep places like From Software free and safe from the nonsensical, ideologically driven agendas of Western localizer freaks. They've infiltrated places like Insomniac or Naughty Dog already. Hell, it's clear that to some degree even places like SEGA and Bandai Namco have been slowly changing like this too. And the day I play a new From Software game and I'm met with the woke contagion of Western politics within the confines of a new Elden Ring or Soulsborne game, I will genuinely become the Joker. We cannot allow these things to happen no matter what. As I've already proven to you, it's clear that outside of some rare Western hits like Baldur's Gate 3, the majority of AAA Western gaming is struggling and falling apart at the seams. Places like Xbox recently have laid off almost 2,000 people, and they cancelled their entire physical games division following their merger with Activision Blizzard. The monopoly-like mindset of these Americanized companies has led to large groups of like-minded, virus-infected mind freaks assembling to transform anything they can get their they-them hands on. And it's proof that Eastern media is absolutely killing it, and it's because they, unlike their Western counterparts, are not so quick to bow down to the mind virus. But if the West has their way with all of these stupid suggestions and demands like removing things like cleavage, no slurs, no jokes to certain groups, and so on, this will lead to neither side of the gaming market being left in their true and untouched forms. The West hates that the East has not submitted, and they will not stop until they are just as destroyed and ugly as they are. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we witness some form of a modern gaming crash where the weight of all of these problems comes smashing down on everyone below it. But it seems like we are heading to some form of a reset already no matter what. Because the way things are going, they cannot continue like this forever. And the Western entertainment industry knows it, and friends, that scares them greatly. So while there will be dents in the armor, and there will be small victories by vocalizers here and there, the reality is that the culture is changing, and it is very clearly stating that not only has the West embraced the East, but that fans like yourself are tired of the agenda of these insanely out-of-touch morons. Tekken 8, Infinite Wealth, Final Fantasy, Palworld, and more. They prove that we're winning this fight. It won't be over anytime soon, but if you ask me, common sense is winning. As always, thank you for watching, like, subscribe, and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thanks to my patrons for supporting the madness, and I hope you enjoy some quality video games in your free time. There is hope that we can turn this around, and I want you to know that I appreciate you and you need to stay vigilant. We're winning, my friends, and I'll see you in the next one.